Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Well, is it almost afternoon? Is it still 11:30 or 12? Well, almost afternoon. We'll just space and go into time travel. I know that Shaka has been a production that a lot of people are excited about. A lot of people had a lot to say about it. I think a lot of people are excited to hear what we have to say. We have 3 panelists today, and I'm really just here to moderate, not to actually moderate the conversation, but to facilitate the conversation. It's not about me. It's not even really about the panelists. It's about the information that you want and the information that you can gain. One thing that is important about MIP, I think, is that it's about an opportunity for us to all learn, for us to all grow, and for us to take our craft to the next level. And I think that's what's important with regards to this particular panel. So if I'm just going to go and start next to me, I am Lizette. I am a commissioning editor at MultiChoice, or DSTV. Next to me, I've got Professor Hlonipha Mokoena, who was a historical consultant on Shaka Ilembe. And she was also, I didn't know this, she also actually wrote on it. So we've got a lot of interesting questions for her. If we can give her a round of applause, please. Next to her, we've got Desiree Markgraaff. Des has been in the industry probably for as long as some of these people have been alive. But Des has a lot of experience, and she's done a lot of big productions. She is the executive producer, has been at BOM for forever and a day, and she's really the kind of person looking at this industry who has been able to mentor individuals and take people in their careers to the next level, but she's also somebody who is extremely passionate about story, and I think that that's one of the things that we are going to chat about today, and relevance when it comes to looking at our cultures and the stories that we tell. Then right at the end, we've got the man that you all need to pitch at. That's that one. Tebogo Matlawa. He is basically the head of scripted for Middle and Mass, and all the wonderful shows that you see for Middle and Mass market on Mzansi. He has a track record of being able to find those gems. He finds the stories that resonate with the people, and he really does have a great head for story, an understanding of what the market wants, and also a great understanding of how to get the story started and how to get conversations started. So on that note, I'd like to start the conversation with Desiree. Desiree, looking at this particular show, why Shaka and why now?
Hi, everybody. Wow. I mean, I think that the starting point for us was nobody's been telling stories of African history. And when we started to think about telling a slate of stories about African history, the first thing we did was a bit of desktop research. And we realized that actually, other than the Shaka series 30 years ago, and I think, Cleopatra, there's been almost no historical coverage of African stories. And where there has been a little, there's been very little budget attached to it. So that was the one reason why. The second reason for us very personally was, when you look at who are our heroes and heroines, many of our stories about heroes and heroines are locked into the struggle against colonization and against apartheid. And we were interested in exploring pre-colonial stories that spoke about an era before that, where we could really start to explore men and women that were charting their own path before colonialism. So one of the important things for us on Shaka Ilembe was to start the story before he was born, to start the story before the colonialists arrived in what is now KwaZulu-Natal, and to build a story that is bigger than just that of the story of Shaka. Of course, we want to lionize him. He was a powerful and important person, still to this day. I mean, he built a nation which exists.
Yeah.
But there were many other people that were very powerful, that influenced and developed Shaka's thinking. And so we wanted to tell a much broader story than that.
Now, Tebogo, listening to Desiree, obviously they had to come in, they had to pitch, and you then had to say yes or no for this particular story. It's a big story. It's a story that is almost a part of our fabric and collective consciousness as South Africans. You know, if you go to schools, a lot of people might not know a lot about our history, but you talk about Shaka and they will have an understanding of who you're talking to, even if it's a vague understanding.
Yeah.
That's a huge responsibility to take on as channel. Did you feel that responsibility when you made the decision to make this series?
So luckily I didn't have that responsibility or decision to make. So this project was started with MultiChoice and the Bomb 6 or 7 years ago, where the conversations that started actually prior to that, maybe even before that the discussion was made. It was our former CEO, Ms. Yolisa Patle, and our current group CEO, Calvo Mawela, who took the decision that this is an important story to tell.
Okay.
And we knew it was going to be a costly story to tell, going to be a difficult story to tell, but the business knew that it was an important story to tell. And we felt that we had the right partner to tell that story. The Bomb has, like you said, a long and proven track record of telling African stories, and particularly South African stories, very well.
Mm-hmm.
So we felt that this important story was in the hands of the right production company to take it as a MultiChoice group. So I can imagine the weight that was on those individuals when they made the decision, but I think we can all agree they made the absolutely right decision
Yeah.
when deciding to make the show.
Personally, when you did start working, obviously,
Yeah.
with your commissioning editors and yourself on this particular project, there is always that kind of balance that you need to maintain. It's a dance between something that's being entertainment, but like you said, this is a very important story, so it's also historical. So from your perspective and channel's perspective, that balance between how accurate you need to be historically and how entertaining you need to be, how were you able to maintain that?
So accuracy was vitally important, and that's why the good prof and many others were brought onto the production to consult. It was many years, many meetings. Desiree had to sit through all of those stuff. But a lot of hours of research was important. But we've always felt that entertainment, there is entertainment within our history. So there's sadness, there's entertainment, there's tears, there's joy. So you didn't have to think too much about what would be entertaining and what would be historical, because the truth in itself contained all those elements of sadness, betrayal, entertainment. So it was, the balance was in that. So if you stayed true to the story, you are going to find those entertaining elements, because we are an exciting people and an entertaining people. You didn't have to fabricate entertainment into our existence. So if you stayed historical, you are going to find the entertainment value in it anyway.
So Prof, I want to bring you in here when we talk about the history. Like both Tebogo and Des have said, this is a process that took many years. It took 6 years, basically, from conception to what we've seen on screen now. At what point did you come in on the project, and what was the key role that you played?
Originally, my role was very small. I used to go to BOM, I think like once a month, and have these long 3-hour sessions where I had to prepare absolutely everything I knew about the history of Southern Africa. Everything from, what size huts people lived in, to the color of cows, what colors were there, to talking about women and the role women played in African history. So, there used to be very, very long sessions in which I would just have to field questions. And then slowly, the role sort of expanded from that 1 hour, 3 hours to like 2 days, and then it became 3 days, and then it became, can you write something for us? And I'd be like, oh, okay. I guess the role just kept on developing. But what I need to say as a historian is that the hardest part about it, of sort of being slowly pulled in, is that you start to think of the knowledge that you have from a visual perspective, which normally we don't get to do as historians. We think of what we do as just being about writing. I'm writing to an audience, I'm writing to other historians, I have to do the citations, I have to do all of the kind of conventions of academic writing. And then all of a sudden you are thrown into this world where it's like, well, is it gonna look beautiful? And you're like, well, I don't know. I wasn't there. So I don't know if it's gonna look beautiful. Right, and so you find yourself having to convert everything that you knew into a visual language, and sort of have to try now and speak the language of film and television, and how people are located, what their bodies look like, and even just as a historian, having to understand that people were actual physical beings. Because
I'm going to
quite a
come
lot-
back to the physical beings and
Right.
what the bodies look like.
Right.
Because there's a lot of questions about those bodies. So I'm definitely going to come back to that. But you made a very interesting point when you talk about, historians, and it's about the written form.
Right.
And let's be honest, there's a saying that history is written by the predators and not by the
Right.
prey.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot of our cultural pre-colonial history that has been written down.
Right.
So from your perspective, doing that research, finding out what is accurate, what were the sources available and how did you go about doing that?
Okay, so the first thing that we tried to do actually was not to rely on the colonial sources.
Okay.
So we had to, again, divorce ourselves from all the colonial debates and say, okay, we understand the colonial debates, was Shaka a savage, was Shaka this sort of Napoleon of Africa, all the sort of superlatives that colonial writers used to put on Shaka. We had to put that aside for a while. It's going to come back, but we had to put it aside for a while.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah, exactly. And say to ourselves, if we had to tell the story as a purely African story, with no sort of, let's say, outsider perspective, how would we tell the story? And so that was part of the outside, like insider perspective, that I then had to try to dig deep and say, well, there are the praises, for example,
Okay.
of the Zulu kings. And a lot of them actually are character sketches. When you read them very closely, they tell you exactly what the person was like, including their bodies. So it tells you exactly what the person was like. And so you sort of think, okay, well, let's use these. And so you now have to reread them and read them and read them and read them. Because before, as a historian, you were just reading them as poetry.
Yeah.
But now, when you have to read them as character sketch, okay, what can we say about this character? So, for example, deciding Senza Nakhona, I kept on telling them, like, the first 15 lines of Senza Nakhona's Izibongo are dedicated to his body.
I can
Literally
understand
like,
why.
We cast well for him.
with ears that
Very well.
It's like literally like with ears that have no fault, with eyes that have no fault, with a stomach that has no fault. And it's literally like 14 lines dedicated just to his physical beauty. And so then, well, it just sort of makes sense.
Yeah.
That you are talking about and it even says that in a time of hunger, he had a flat stomach. I mean, it was like, okay. Obviously, this guy really liked his body, but also that the poet who wrote the praises also liked his body. So the poet agreed with his self-image.
Yeah.
And so then you start to use the praises quite extensively
Okay.
as a way of creating a very African understanding of who these people were.
Now the prof makes a very important point in that she says, as historians, they look at what's written down and they don't think about, what's going to look pretty on screen. So when you guys had to take all of that historical information and stay true to the history in terms of the fact that it's not plastic beads that were used, materials you couldn't just go down and buy a dye from, I don't know, Discam or somewhere. What were the decisions that you made and how did that influence how you shot and also how you included the communities that you shot in?
Well, actually, beauty was really important to us. We wanted to make a very beautiful series. We wanted to make a series that you could feel that that was lush and gorgeous. Every frame should be gorgeous. And, when you start to look at the artifacts that exist, you'll see in the carvings, in the pots, in the beadwork, there was great attention to detail and incredibly beautiful design. And then, we spend time on location recce's and you're in this landscape and you're trying to imagine what it would have been like 250 years ago in this incredible landscape where you don't have all the influences that we have today. There was a huge appreciation for beauty, and that comes out in the praises, in the design work, in the way huts were constructed. So it really wasn't hard for us to find a way to say, how do we make this world beautiful? Because actually it's there.
Yeah.
And a lot of what we see as sort of modern day Zulu aesthetic obviously has changed. Plastic beads, the advent of mass manufactured, these very bright colors. But in fact, when you look at the old pieces, that wasn't so. And so we started off from a point of saying that we wanted to be really authentic about the materials that we used, even in wardrobe. And Shelley, who you'll hear from later when we talk about the design of wardrobe, a lot of attention was spent, what are the birds that are in the area? What feathers would you have used? Which were the precious feathers? Who would have had the precious feathers? So there was a lot of just going into the minutiae. And, you know, when people say, why did it take you 6 years? It took us 6 years because we really spent time looking at that and analyzing that to surface a look. And the second thing was, we really wanted to try and create a feel that was authentic to the time and not to do a futuristic version, because we felt like our history hasn't been told authentically, and we wanted to start there. We wanted to start imagining what it was like, what it looked like, and we wanted to stay away from the idea that, you know, people lived in dusty little kraals with small huts. It wasn't like that at all. In fact, in lots of conversations with Prof, small details would come out about the attention to detail around beauty, around how people beautified themselves with animal fat, with bedecking themselves with beads and with copper and brass and so on. So it was clear that beauty was a big part of the aesthetic. And then just making it was another really beautiful journey for us, because of course we could have got big manufacturers in to make it, as we do normally on productions, to make it easier for us. But for us also, we felt like the show was bigger than BOM, was bigger than Mnet. It's a story that belongs to South Africa, and it's a story that particularly is held, you know, with deep love and reverence in KwaZulu-Natal.
Yeah.
So we spent a long time sending scouts to search for beautiful artifacts. We bought pots from people who are really making pots in KZN, all the way through up to Limpopo. We looked for pot makers who are doing beautiful things. We had women that weave, making us hundreds of kilometers of rope. You see them on the back of the huts. All of that was handmade by groups of women in rural communities. We went and found people that were still building huts in the authentic way, and we brought 120 people up from Joburg to build the huts. And, you know, it was really beautiful to watch them, because these are artists.
Yeah.
So all the pieces, Shelley spent a lot of time traveling in KZN and all the way up to Namibia to look at how Himba women, for example, work with leather. So there was a lot of effort put into spreading the love around financially, but also we gained from it, because all this knowledge sits indigenously in small communities. So it was a really fantastic experience. Even the weapons, the skins, all of those things.
So, Tebs, I saw you know, nodding there when Des was talking about the fact that it was important for the communities as well. From a channel perspective, understanding, like, you know, when we normally go onto a set, it is a lot easier to have things mass-produced. And you said yourself that you knew that it was going to take money to make a production like this, because actually all you're buying is time. So was it also imperative from a channel perspective that the local communities and the local artisans be drawn into a project like this, and why?
Yeah, look, it was indeed an important thing for us, and I think BOM took that endeavor to heart. I mean, over 10,000 jobs were created across the country in the making of the show, you know. Both, a lot of them formally, a lot of them informally, right? A lot of women that were part of were empowered in the making of this. So MultiChoice as a company, even though our head offices are in Randburg, we're not a Johannesburg company, right? We're a South African company, we're an African company. So the fact that we could reach, one production could reach so far out the country was a proud achievement. It's almost not possible with most shows to have the reach that a production like this reached. I don't know how many flights Des and Prof probably were on during making of this. So we are proud of the economic opportunities that a show like this provided to the people of South Africa.
Now, of course, a show like this, like we said, is very important culturally. And a script is a script, an idea is an idea, but with a story like this, you need buy-in from key individuals. So as a production house, how did you go about getting the buy-in from, you know, the Zulu community, the isiZulu community, and the royalty that comes with that?
Actually, that's what took us the longest time, because first of all, you've got to, you know, it's a complex world, and you've got to work out who's who in that world, and that takes some time. Anybody who's gone down to KZN to try and find out who to talk to just to get to permission to shoot somewhere knows you're going to get sent down a lot of roads before you. But we wanted to really, we wanted to build relationships, and not only relationships with the royal family, who obviously we felt was really important, and right up front, you know, we started to try and have a dialogue with the previous king, who we did have a dialogue with, and we created a really beautiful colloquium where we invited, I guess what you'd call local custodians of stories.
Yeah.
They're not historians in that they're not academically historians, but these are men and women who live and love and breathe these stories and this culture every single day. And so we had this fantastic colloquium with 30, 40 people invited, and it was over 3 days. It was incredibly vibrant and exciting, and that helped us navigate where to find people and how to start conversations. And we then started conversations with descendants from the different families. Even that was very complicated because, you know, it's 200-300 years and families have split up. Even now, if you think of your own families, who represents the Mtetwa and who's the official representative and who isn't, and, you know, so we got into a lot of hot water often. But we really tried as much as we could to try and speak to everybody and spend a lot of time in the area. So we spent a lot of time, you know, driving, you know, through Ishawi all the way up to Richards Bay and Pongola. We were, you know, we spent a lot of time in the area meeting with a lot of people. And it takes time. Because you can't just go in as a filmmaker and say, you know, I want to meet with you and talk to you about your history. It doesn't work like that. There's a whole process that you have to go through, and you have to respect the customs of that process. So, you know, for example, I'll tell one day we were filming and we thought we could steal a little shot. It was very beautiful, and early morning, nobody's going to notice us. It was just a few of us. At like 4 a.m., we snuck onto this hill and we went to shoot an establishing shot. But you know, when you're in KZN, there is a community seeing you. And somebody saw us, and within 10 minutes, somebody was there, and the voice had traveled all the way, and we were stopped from leaving the area and brought into a formal hearing with the chief in the area, who said, "Why did you disrespect me for coming in here without asking my permission?" And he was right. We're now very good friends. Chief Shezi, we apologized. We had to pay a fine. And, you know, so if you go into a space where you are respectful and you understand it's a two-way street, we really met with a lot. We were met with a lot of love.
Now, Prof, of course, as Des said, and you've mentioned, that there isn't a lot of written history. But now with this having come out, the series having come out, there is a lot of archive that you now have at your disposal. Are you going to be publishing a lot more articles now with regards to the history of Shaka in particular, but just looking at the area and the clans and the tribes and all of that sort of stuff? Can we expect some publishing work to be done?
Well, actually, the person that I guess I have become emotionally attached to is Mkabayi, if I can say it like that way. And it's exactly because she's, well, I don't know if I'm going to be spoiling the story, but historically she outlived everyone. She outlived Shaka, she outlived Dingiswaye, she outlived Zwide. And so she's kind of a very attractive woman. Because she had her own clan, and so my uncle currently lives in the area where the Abakulusi, Mkabayi's clan actually are, and my uncle was constantly calling me to offer me correctives. You better not say this, you better not say that. So Abakulusi are still very much alive as a clan that was created, and also as a military. It was almost like a military frontier. So she was like the leader of a military kraal or a homestead called the Abakulus. And so she's the person that I could say I feel a kind of the need to take her further. The need to give her a much larger personality than I think she was given historically. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that when the outsiders came in, the main assumption that they made was that this is a history about men.
Men.
Right.
Yes.
And so they would ask all the men and say, oh, what do you know about African history? What do you know about African history? And she actually knew a lot about the period, but nobody
course.
ever
Asked
asked her. So she's one person that I feel almost emotionally attached to her, as if, I don't know, like I've been reading a lot of poetry as well,
Okay.
where she's a character. A lot of people have actually listened to Mkabayi. It's a very strange thing. So there's a famous Zulu poet called V.W. Vilakazi.
Okay.
And he has a whole poem where he said, I went to visit Kwedubuza and I was met by no one. And then at the end, he says, and then Mkabayi came out and then they had a conversation, and the conversation is part of the poem. So
Oh, that's
I'm not the
amazing.
first person to have this sort of attraction to this amazing leader, amazing woman, and then this sort of just an elder who lived for so long that I think people were kind of surprised that after all the things she had done, she managed to live that.
She outlived them all.
So, I mean, Shaka, I think everyone's attracted to Shaka,
Yeah.
everyone's attracted to Dingiswayo. But I would say that the person that I'm most attracted to as a future project is Mkabayi.
Talking about future projects, and I'm glad you took a sip of water now. I think obviously the last episode aired on Sunday, episode 12. And there has been an announcement of season 2.
Yes.
Is there a lot of excitement? How far are we in the process? What are we looking at?
There's definitely a lot of excitement, but I think we're very much at our infancy stage in terms of season 2. But yeah, we're happy, we're proud of the achievement that season 1 done. And like I said when announcing season 2, it's always harder to make a season 2 of a very successful show. But we leave in the capable hands, yeah. But yeah, it's a journey we'll walk, and we're hoping, and we're sure with the team behind, we can have a very successful season 2. So
Any spoilers?
coming soon is my spoiler. And
Your spoiler's just coming soon.
it's coming soon. But yeah, we also aware it landed. I mean, the obvious thing it'll be the reign of Shaka. We saw his rise or his reign, but there will be many other. Just like Des said, it never focused on one tribe at all.
Yeah.
It just had Shaka in it as the name, you know. But I think three very strong households and stories were represented in season 1, and I think they were given strong weight. The Zwidas, the Mtatwas, and obviously the Zulus. So it's a celebration of Zulu culture and its influences. I mean, if you saw, we even went to Maputo, which made some people angry, to show the history of the Portuguese and all of that. So it was a well-rounded historical tale that just is entered through the POV of one character, but it's definitely not one character story.
And I think that's so important that, that, as you said, it's the POV, but it's not just that person, because that gives you legs to go into a second season, into a third season, into a 5, 6, if we're looking that far ahead. But it's also the fact that it's not just one key individual, so you learn more about the culture as you keep unpacking. But also, of course, you've learned some lessons from season 1. So moving into season 2, what would you say are some of the key lessons that you take into season 2?
I mean, I think obviously we learned a lot about how to scale up. That was our biggest fear in the beginning, was can we build the scale that everybody, the expectation around what Shaka will be, and how do we learn to scale up in that way? And so, part of starting the story where we did very early was that we wanted to learn how to manage scale, how to manage battles. Before Shaka, the battles were very small. They were skirmishes. They were mostly throwing spears, a few hundred people. After Shaka, these battles moved into 2, 3, 5, 20,000, 50,000 people in battle. So really season 1 was us learning how to use the tools that we will flex, we hope, in season 2. And a lot of that was about learning how to work with VFX in a way that felt like it doesn't draw attention to itself. So for us, the challenge was can we use VFX without people noticing?
Okay.
Because once we want to really scale up to having 20,000 people in battle, we don't want it to look like 300, where it's like a sci-fi kind of feel.
Yeah.
So how do we really start to work with VFX, and also, again, working with local companies, trying to empower our own service providers, because we don't have a fully fledged, and it's a growing industry,
Yeah.
but they need the work to turn over. So we went on a journey with a number of VFX company learning how to do things. So we did hyenas, bees, bats. We did, all the big paramouncies. All of that was VFX. Then we started working with augmenting people. Then we started working with augmenting cattle.
Wow.
So over the course of the series, we built a lot of these assets. And so I think that will help us in the second season. But I also just wanted to say, the beautiful thing about history is it kind of gives you little key points. Okay, you know that Shaka was born.
Yes.
And you know that Shaka became a famous king. And you know that you started with 700 people in the Zulus. And you know that you ended with many, many thousands. And today, 20 million Zulu people.
Yeah.
But in between, nobody knows what was the conversation between Shaka and Mkabai, or between, for example, the journey of Shaka and his mother. We know that he went back and he killed many people at the Elangeni, so they must have hurt him deeply. But we don't know exactly what that is. So there's this fantastic creative license that you have in history to say, what could have led to that action? And that's where we found the sweet spot of storytelling, is land on the big moments and then try to imagine what was human? How did a human being get so angry that he wanted to take revenge on his own mother's family and kill them?
Yeah. So Prof, looking at season 2, looking at the history that you've already put together, I'm going to ask you. Any interesting characters that we have nice praise singing about their bodies to come in?
Well, I'm going to give you a little hint, which is that I think some characters are going to live longer than they did in real life, which is very difficult to think about. So
because their bodies are so good.
Because their bodies are so good. So they're going to live longer than they did in real life. So we're extending, so we're telling a bit of a fiction there.
Yeah.
And for me, it's really about how do we think about that reign? What does it mean to be a leader?
Yeah.
And so I'm having to do a lot of homework, revisiting a lot of the sources.
Okay.
To think about how did people think about leadership at the time? How did people think about the role of the king? What was the role of the king? It sounds very obvious.
Yes.
That when you're king, you have all this power over all these thousands of people. But actually, it's not as easy as that. It's quite complicated, because one of the things that gave a king power was to spread yourself, spread your cattle, spread your warriors, amabuto, across the terrain that you identify as your own. And so you are actually managing a very well spread out set of sites of power. And so I'm hoping that we will be able to do that.
That scale again, I'm just saying.
We will be able
Scale
to,
costs.
Right. We'll be able to do that. But there's no question that the beauty and the bodies are going to be there. I was one of those people who pushed for
the bodies.
Yeah, because it's when you hear about how much physical labor people actually did.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little story about what Zulu men actually ended up doing in the colonial period.
Okay.
So before the building of Durban Harbour, and Zulu men used to swim out into the water and offload ships and then swim back with the cargo. So when
you said swim.
Yes, swim.
Okay.
Like swim into the water.
There's this thing about us not being able to swim. I'm just
that's
saying.
exactly it. That's exactly it.
Okay. All right.
That's exactly why it is. So you have to imagine that these men were extremely physically
toned and strong.
Not just physically strong, but physically capable.
Yeah.
But also the women at the same time, because there were also female amabuto. So then when you then have to start to think about, okay, what did the women who were the warriors, what did they do? then you end up with a much, much bigger story of,
Oh, wow.
of what the physical, the human body can actually achieve. And so for me as a historian, that has also been something that has become fascinating, which historians never do. We never think of the human body as expendable, as something that you actually put energy out into the world. And what does that look like? So for me, that's the bigger story that I sort of have to wrap my head around, since the beautiful bodies are going to be there.
Now, Des, we're making jokes about the beautiful bodies, but obviously it takes a lot of work from these actors to get into that kind of physical condition. Looking at the battle scenes, you have choreographers, you have stunt people. It takes also a lot of preparation and a lot of timing. Did you find that a lot of your time was spent in pre-production, in kind of organizing all of that, and how important was pre-production for those physical scenes?
It was really important. First, we had to get everybody fit, physically fit, because, you know, we're shooting through the whole of winter, and people are wearing very little clothes, and so you need to be strong and fit to be able to just withstand, and you barefoot. So just getting people strong enough to withstand the shooting conditions was important. But also, obviously, everybody wanted to look lean and fit as they would have been at the time, because you've got to think about what people's diets were at the time. So all the actors, specifically the men, but women too, went on a very strict dietary regime. We had a team of trainers that did individual training sessions, because Lemogang, for example, has to start his journey off as a young boy, and then we have to see him bulk up and become a warrior. So actually what Lemogang did was he spent months bulking up, training, getting very strong, and then he had to go on an extreme diet where he got very lean, but the muscle was still there. So that we shot all the scenes where he was young, lean, and he was hungry for those months. And then he had to eat and bulk up very quickly. We had a break in the schedule for him of 5 weeks so that he could bulk up for the scenes that we see him in the last episode, where he's now, you know, a man. So physical training was important. The whole top of Bomb's roof, we had these mats, and we had training sessions every day about how to move. We also had a special body coordinator, an orchestrator, who looked a lot at how people moved, how you would have walked, because we walk around with shoes and our gait even is different. So there was a lot of, you know, how do you walk when you're not wearing shoes? How would you fight in that time when you've got, you know, it's not kung fu karate fighting. So there was a lot of, we had a lot of people working on physicality. And the cast were absolutely amazing. I mean, they went on diets, they did training, they did, you know, Nomzamo, for example, has to start off as a young girl. And, you know, so she also had to lose a lot of weight to get that delicacy in her body. And then she had to beef up a little bit as she becomes a mother and a mature woman. So
And we all have to beef up. As
she was so happy when the second part came. Finally,
I can eat. I would like to open up the floor just for a couple of questions. We're not going to take many questions because of the fact that, yeah, you know, time is not always on our side. But I'd like to. There was a lady at the back who apparently we're not taking questions. Oh, we are. Oh, okay. Okay. But yeah, let's just quickly take a question. The lady at the back.
Thank you so much for an amazing production. I really appreciate your passion around making sure that things are told right. I have a question around a very heated conversation about the annunciation and reflection of the Zulu language in the series, and the issue of how the northern KZN Zulu people speak versus the southern. I just wanted to understand, is there really a difference between, I know obviously history, maybe you don't have the sound of how they spoke, but is how they speak in the series almost really close to maybe the times? I know it's a difficult question to answer, but it's a heated conversation on Twitter, so.
So, Prof, we actually had a chat about this before we came up, about the importance of language and dialects in that particular time, and the discussions and heated debates
Yeah.
that you guys had. So I think the question is about accuracy in terms of how people spoke in that time, and then also the differences in dialects,
Yeah.
and why then the decision was taken to standardize it for the series itself. So maybe, Prof, if you can take that for us, please.
Yeah, I'm going to try and summarize many of the fights, because we had very, very many fights. And part of the problem is every Zulu speaker thinks that they speak the best isiZulu.
100%.
And so everyone thinks my Zulu is the best version of the language, your Zulu is the dialect. So essentially we all think that my Zulu is the real thing and your Zulu is the dialect. But actually, when you look at the historical record, there were dozens of dialects. And essentially every surname, almost like Hlubi, Kwabe, were dialects. They all spoke there. And much of it actually, again, is beautiful. It's people just improvising on the same theme. So, I mean, I'll share a little bit of my own childhood. When we were children, we used to create our own versions of isiZulu. Because it's actually quite easy. You just either break off the beginning parts, the prefix, and then all the end parts, and then add something to it, and then you have a totally new language. And so it's actually quite easy to create these dialects. So some people don't pronounce L, they pronounce Y. Some people, that's called Tefuya. Some people, like people from the sort of in-between KZN and the Eastern Cape, who are Amathubi, they speak a particular dialect which sort of mixes Sotho and Xhosa and Zulu into one language. And so they have their own dialects, etc., etc. And we couldn't put that all in the show, because it would literally just have you've had people speaking something and people going,
What
are you
is
saying?
saying?
Right. Now what has been standardized is written isiZulu.
Okay.
So that is the standard. The only standardization that we actually did was that because the actors were reading isiZulu, they had to in some ways pronounce the isiZulu the way it has become a written language, which is very different from the way in which people speak. So when you listen to a Zulu person speak and then you listen to them read, it's often two completely different people. And so we had to sort of allow each actor to speak in their own natural voice. As much as I could, I tried to sort of emphasize that idea that we don't want fake accents, because then if you really try to speak the Kwabe accent, it would sound fake because you forget. And when you actually read the description, it's much more complicated than just they substituted Y for L, because there were rules about that substitution as well. So we tried not to eliminate people's natural accents, but the real limit is that a script has to be written.
Yeah.
And writing a script in isiZulu is actually one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do, because I understand isiZulu in a particular way, and then when I'm trying to convey, because now I have to suddenly think, I have to convey this to an audience, which kind of isiZulu can I use? I had to call my mom a lot. Desiree was laughing that my mom should get credit, because I would call my mom and say, Mom, does this sound like real isiZulu? And I would read out the sentences to her, and my mom would give her own criticism of what she thought was good Zulu and what was not good Zulu. And my mom, we even had a conversation about artificial intelligence, because now you are getting a lot of tools that allow you to simply translate.
Yes.
And the isiZulu that comes out of Google Translate is terrible. But now how do you say that to people? Like, please don't use Google Translate, it's terrible.
Please don't use Google Translate.
Exactly.
It's terrible.
So things like that, like can we use Google Translate,
No.
for example? And those became some of the major fights.
But if I can just jump in there, because it was very complex. You also want actors to be able to bring their best.
Right.
So you've got to find that balance between authenticity of language and then not placing things on actors where they're having to think all the time about what they're saying, and then they lose performance. So that was a big thing. So we had dialogue coaches on set, 2 dialogue coaches on set all the time, plus they were doing dialogue lessons behind the scenes. Wow. And even between all the dialogue coaches, they will argue about the sentence. So it was it's an ongoing thing to perfect.
To perfect. Second question. There's a gentleman here in the front. Feel free on this side to ask questions as well. Anybody there?
Hi, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I just want to ask to Desiree, how difficult or how easy was it to cast for Shaka? Because there's been like a Shaka that we've been exposed to before. And did you not feel like pressure to duplicate the one that we know? And after you've cast and he's been on TV, are you, with the criticism of, oh, we like this one or we like this one, do you feel like you did an amazing job with this one?
You know, the casting of Shaka, of course, was the most terrifying thing. And like we did casting for a long time, 2 years. We started in COVID. We saw thousands of people. I mean, we had big mass castings in KZN. And then through COVID, we had people sending in videotapes, etc. Two things about it. Well, one was that we wanted to also, we imagined Shaka in a different way.
Yeah.
We didn't imagine Shaka only as this, 8-pack warrior. We imagined him as we were telling the story from a child, the things that formed him, a vulnerable teenager, the things that affected him and gave him pain. So we wanted to tell a story. We wanted an actor that would be able to portray all of those layers. And we also, at the end, wanted to land up with an actor that we felt would give Shaka an intelligence, a strategic intelligence, a human intelligence. He wasn't just a warrior. You don't build a nation just by going around and stabbing people with spears. You've got to be a charismatic, complex, smart, thinking person. So we started off saying that's the man we wanted to cast. And then we were, of course, nervous. I mean, Henry Clele was a fantastic Shaka. What a great portrayal. I mean, he's everybody's imagination of Shaka. He is Shaka. So we were very scared of how we're going to compete. We can't compete. We just want to create a different person. So partly starting with the child gave us that palate cleanser. Get to know this child. Get to know the people around this child. Get to meet the teenager. So that by the time we introduced Shaka the adult, hopefully you're already in love with this character's journey. And we tried to give Lemogang the best entrance. So in all the casting, Lemogang was there quite early as a possible contender. And we had lots of backwards and forwards, but we felt certain that Lemogang was going to bring what was needed to this role, that complexity, that depth, that vulnerability, that inner anger. And we were so nervous on the last 2 episodes because, of course, everybody was in love with the series and people were saying, but when is Shaka coming? And so we are so grateful that he got such a warm reception, and it really is a testament to Lemogang's talent and the hard work that he put into that role. I mean, he just, we are very respectful to him.
The lady in the green, she's almost standing up, so you might as well. Please, ask her.
I was like, man.
You've got to get in on this action.
I wanted to first say thank you. Thank you for the work that you have done. You have definitely signed history and taken it back and reimagined it as beautiful as possible. I am Nana Bula Bula. I'm a screenwriter, actress, singer, songwriter, dancer, choreographer, and legend in the making.
Okay.
So I have a question for both Prof and Desiree. The idea of telling stories from our archives as Africans is a very intricate and dangerous territory because we lack the actual evidence sometimes, and it's hard to really go find. For example, telling the story of Shaka obviously was not easy, but because he's such a prominent figure, within even our textbooks from high school, the idea of Shaka was very familiar. What happens to screenwriters who do want to go, or what would your advice be to screenwriters or possible future filmmakers who want to, you guys have opened the gates and allowed us to start believing we can go there, but what would be your advice for us who want to tell stories that do not have reachable or you know,
Yeah.
Source
understanding
material.
the source material.
Yeah.
Because there's other stories, pre-colonial and apartheid, but also like that are hidden, and we don't have the access to it. Also because they're told in a particular village, and it's usually hidden in one song, and the history of that person is left in one song. And then you now as a storyteller need to go and reimagine that person through one song. So what would be your advice digging into the archives as a storyteller? Thank you.
I think that question's got two
parts to it.
components.
Yeah.
So I'll just deal with my component and you can deal with yours. Definitely, partly making this series for us at BOM was to open the door for more stories of African history to be told. If we can tell this story successfully, because it's got a big hero that everybody knows, if we can get people to be interested in this, then it should open the door for other stories to be told. Number one. Number two, if the story is good, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that nobody knows that person. We're going to be interested even more when you tell us that was a real person. But if the story is good, if the story is interesting, if it's got, you know, heart and soul and dramatic reason to be told, I can't believe that, you know, commissioners are not going to say, I'm interested in that story.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, be brave. Don't be scared. Because if we're scared of history, we were terrified. I mean, we've got people phoning us, and I've had so many calls and so many people so furious. You shouldn't have told it this way, and you've ruined the Mtetwa history. But it's about intent. Our intent was to tell a story that was authentic, respectful, beautiful, that paid respect and made people feel proud. If your intent is good, don't be scared. Because you're going to piss somebody off.
Yeah.
Okay, but tell the story, get it out there. That's
And
my
then,
part.
Prof, in terms of sources and the
Yes.
research?
I'm going to tell a bit of sort of my own academic background. I mean, I went in search of a Zulu writer called Markgraaff that when I started work on Markgraaff, the Wikipedia page on Markgraaff said Markgraaff was the illiterate assistant of John William Kalenzo. And by the time I finished my own research, we now have an entire archive of Markgraaff's writing.
Wow.
Everything that he did, because I wanted to prove that this person was not just a footnote.
Yeah.
And I went out there and I was like, I'm going to tell the story, and I'm going to find the material, and I'm going to show people that he does not deserve to be just in a footnote somewhere. So that intention of taking something that is sort of in the margins of history and then putting center stage and saying this person was actually more important than what you realize is actually part of storytelling in my view. At the time when I was doing this, there was no prospect whatsoever of a film. Markgraaff has now been in a film, which many of you may never see. A British crew did it. The film's called Amashinga, which sort of means bad people, Amashinga. And the film, his voice is there. I had to write his voice. And I thought, wow, Markgraaff, you've gone from being described as the illiterate assistant of John William Kalenzo to being a movie star. You know, how does that happen? And I think it's the same with many of the people that we've included in the story of Shaka. Zwide was never really a prominent, I mean, people knew about the Nxumalo, the Ndwandwes, etc., but nobody thought of him as this kind of nemesis almost of the Zulus, like I'm going to destroy all of them. We've created this force of nature of someone who actually had almost also a deep passion for just destroying the Zulus. In the same way with Dingiswayo. You know, people have written about Dingiswayo. So there's a novel, again, by B.W. Vilakazi called Dingiswayo Gachobe. Like, how many people had read that novel? But hopefully now that we've told the story, people are going to go to the library and actually pick up this book, which was published in the 1930s, and reread it, because now it's like, okay, who's this Dingiswayo guy? So I think much of what film does is it takes exactly the small stories and makes them into a big deal. It says this person was actually much bigger than you imagine, and makes the person bigger, makes the story bigger, and in the process makes history bigger. Because for me, that is also one of the reasons why I loved participating in this film. I mean, as a person who's a historian, most of the stuff I do is like writing 30 pages on a very, very small slice of history. But now I've had people watching 12 weeks of sort of like this most beautiful story, and I'm thinking, you know, if I go back to the archives, I'll go back as a different person.
Yeah.
I will no longer be going back into the archives thinking, oh, sad, poor me, I'm just a historian. I'm just a historian. Nobody ever listens to me. Nobody ever takes me seriously. Nobody reads my articles. Now I'll go back and be like, well, I actually don't care if you read my articles. I made a movie, so.
So I think that also the important part is basically you're almost like a detective. So yes, it might be that one person who wrote the song about that particular person that you want to tell the story about, but then listen in the song who are other people that surrounds that person. And maybe you'll get more information about them and then start building the world from there. But basically you're a detective. And you've got to keep getting those breadcrumbs and trying to then piece out the story and then flesh it back together once you've gone to all the different places and to all the different people. 2 more questions. Yes, finally on the side of the room. Yes.
Hi, I just want to start by saying thank you for giving us the narration from Kabai's gaze, even though in the intro it's very similar to Dr. Finn's intro, but I think it nicely silences the white gaze, and yeah, thank you. My question is, with so many naked bodies on set, what are the measures that are put in place to make sure that everyone is safe and comfortable? Yeah.
I mean, that was a big consideration for us from the beginning. Even how naked are we? So right up front in the casting process, we started with many conversations with the cast about how do they feel. And the first signal we actually got was from the female cast. As we were doing auditions and saying to people, how do you feel? Which way do you think we should go? Most of the female cast said, we have to do it authentically. And we are comfortable in that. So we started off being given the signals by actors as we were doing the casting process. But of course we were a huge set with many semi-naked bodies all day. And in the beginning we were very worried about how we were going to manage a set, you know, whether it was going to be sexualized. We brought in Swift in the beginning. We did a big talk with the cast and the crew around appropriate behavior, around how to behave on set, around, you know, just what feels uncomfortable. Nomzamo Mbato, who's co-executive producer, spent a lot of time in those conversations with fellow cast members. And this is not only about women, because it's men too, you know, that we're all talking about the beautiful men's bodies, but men too feel self-conscious about these things. But I want to tell you that there was something really magical that happened on this project. In 138 days of shooting, with semi-naked people all the time, we did not have one incident on this set ever. There was never a moment where anybody felt anything inappropriate. And I think it's because it was not a sexualized nudity. It was a nakedness that felt appropriate to the story and the period. So in the beginning, Shelley had gowns for everybody, and we had nipples this and all sorts of things. And within a day, the actor said, we don't want it. We're comfortable. We made about 3,000 very complex thongs and things, because you see a lot of guys having to run and jump. And so we wanted people to feel safe and comfortable. So individually, we spent a lot of time with each cast member about what they wanted. And then it didn't really matter. If we cast somebody who wasn't comfortable with being naked, wardrobe accommodated it. So it really, of course, the maidens, predominantly were bare-breasted. But if somebody felt that they weren't comfortable with that, it was no problem. The same with sex scenes. If somebody felt uncomfortable, we wouldn't go there. And even if we had gone there with everybody's consent, in post-production, cast came to see the scenes. Are you comfortable? Would you like to change something? Are you happy with this shot? So it was a very collaborative process, and I feel like the ancestors were watching over us on this show, because really it could have been different, and it wasn't. It was very beautiful.
Prof, you also want to add to that?
I also want to add that I'm very grateful that the cast actually accommodated me, because I would come to set and normally I would have been sitting in a tent watching the shoot on screen, and I decided to break the rules and actually pretend that I'm a member of the crew and just walk around with a member. And the most amazing thing is that at no point did any of the actors look at me and say, "What is she doing here? Why are you here?" And so I wanted to add that there was a lot of generosity from my perspective, a lot of generosity from the actors who allowed even people like me to be like a fly on the wall and watch even the most difficult scenes that they were having to perform. And I would be there pretending to be standing behind the camera or behind the sound person, sort of moving around with the crew. Because as a historian, it was important for me to feel it, to see it, and be there and see what the work that I had contributed was, what it actually looked like, and be comfortable with the fact that this is going to be on television. Because
And that your name's going to be there as a historian.
Exactly.
Yeah. As a historical.
Yeah. So I also sort of had felt that I needed to be part of the production, even though I wasn't there every day. It was a very generous set. People were showing me what it is they do, which I didn't know anything about film. So I just wanted to add that there was a lot of generosity on the part of the actors and the crew.
Okay, one last question. Wow, okay. You can ask that. No. Let's go with the gentleman with the glasses over here.
Hi, my question is for, sorry.
Yeah, no, you.
For Tebogo. This might be kind of premature, but watching the show, I think it does set a huge precedent for the possibility of like nation building. So I did my master's in kind of like documentary arts and television, and how television shows as entertainment play a serious role in how to build nation building and the pride of a people. And so I wonder if there is actually a possibility of a spin-off of series like this, when you think of the Rain Queen in Limpopo, Queen Mujaji, and obviously when you guys went to Mozambique. So I wonder what that perspective is from a business. Like, do you guys have budget to go that far? Just because I do think it's important for how South Africans imagine themselves and have kind of a national pride in this type of forum.
Look, I think Desiree mentioned that it was important to tell the story well, because it opens the discussion to broadcasters, and not just us, but broadcasters around the country, to engage in such stories. And in terms of what's on the slate, the famous quote is what? Watch the space. I think the famous quote is watch the space. So there is stuff we're working on, stuff I can't announce yet, but definitely watch the space, and you'll see things being announced or coming out soon. Cool.
Okay. Thank you so much, everybody, for taking the time to chat to us. Just as we round off, gentlemen and ladies, heading into season 2, hopefully season 3, hopefully some spin-offs, we don't know. What would you like the audience to have taken away from this, and what do you think that they can look forward to heading into the next season? And it doesn't need to be story. It can be, how they feel about South Africa, how they feel about our history, any of that sort of stuff.
I mean, I feel like television often reflects where we are in a moment as a country. And I felt the timing of this show was really important, because we have been feeling depressed. We have been asking questions of ourselves, where are we? And to take a look back at who we are, that we are kings and queens, that we come from greatness, I think was an important thing at a moment. And for me personally, that's what I wanted people to take away, is to say, don't feel dejected about the moment where we are now. History is big, but go back and remember just how great we were. And what I hope people are looking forward to is that we try to tell the story in a different way, and that the next season is about the building of a nation, about the challenge of leadership. And we're in a challenge of leadership right now. And we hope that the story will be resonant to where we are right now, about what it takes to build a society that flourishes. And, you know, Shaka, like it or not, and the leaders that followed after him built a nation that flourishes still today.
Still today.
There are lessons for us to learn, not just the colonial, you know, construct of this brute. No, there were much deeper lessons to learn. So that's what we hope we're going to bring to you.
Prof, from your perspective?
Yeah, I think I'd like to echo Desiree's points. I think it's really about looking forward to this great leader in a way. And as I say, for me, it's the inward battle of the great leader. It's not so much the battles that he won on the battlefield, but the emotional, psychological. So that's one of the reasons why I love the character, is because we've really tried very hard to create a Shaka who is emotionally attractive, rather than just someone who is physically attractive or who is sort of, let's say, just a big man, you know.
A caricature.
Yeah. So I think that the audience can look forward to more complexity. I think that was that's the tone that we've set, a more complicated set of characters in the season.
Yeah, I just, the important takeout for me is that people understand that no one does African stories better than Africans. So
100%,
there's something
100%.
that I wanted to be a takeout, is that we are able and very able of telling our own narratives and putting ourselves there, and that we should own it and be the one who tells our story. And that's what I want people to take out from this.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much to the panel, and thank you everybody here for taking the time to chat with us. Hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.